Hi YouTube and welcome back to True Crime Revealed. Today's story takes place in the late 1800s in France. It is the story of Blanche Monnier. If you are familiar with the story of Blanche Monnier, you have seen this shocking photo before. For those of you who are new to the story, the woman in the two pictures on the thumbnail are in fact the same woman. However, she was locked and starved in a room for over 25 years by her own family members, one of which was her own mother. And it's just stunning. She basically fell in love with this guy who didn't make as much money, I guess, as the family would have liked. And because they didn't want her to be with them, they basically locked her in this room for 25 years, all but starved her to death, serving her scraps just enough to barely keep her alive. She was laying in her own filth, excrement, the whole nine, and it's just shocking. And I remember seeing the photo thinking, this cannot be the same woman, and lo and behold, it was. So we're doing the story today to honor her memory. Hopefully you guys learned something new about French socialite Blanche Monnier. As usual, guys, if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next video. Bye now.
Hi, guys. It is Kira. Welcome back to True Crime Revealed. Today's story is going to be set out of France, and it is featuring the tragic story of Blanche Monnier. I am not French. I've never really taken a French class except for one semester in college, and it was one of the hardest classes for me, and I got out of Dodge really quickly, so I'm not good with French. So please don't come for me in the comments if I'm butchering this. I do apologize. Some of the names in the story. I've seen some people pronounce it as Blanche, others as Blanche. I'm just going to say Blanche Monnier. But the story is about Blanche Monnier, and it's a very tragic one, just talking about her last years of her life from about 26 on. She was locked in a room for about 25 years by her own family members. So that's what today's story is going to be about. Blanche Monnier was a French socialite who was from a well respected conservative bourgeoisie family in Poitiers, France. She was born on March 1st of 1849 in Poitiers, France, which was in the Second French Republic. Blanche's parents were Émile Monnier and Louise de Marconnet. She also had a brother who was older and his name was Marcel. Blanche Monnier was about 4 years younger than her brother Marcel, and the family lived in a really nice upscale part of Poitiers, France. So she was used to living the good life, and she grew up as a smart, beautiful girl who enjoyed reading and just was basically a happy kid. And basically, in her childhood, there wasn't really anything in my research that I could see that was really disruptive. She was just a regular kid. Blanche Monnier's parents, Emile and Louise, came from money. They had noble origins and they were a pretty wealthy family. So they had a lot of high expectations as to who they wanted their children to be with, who they wanted to marry, and ultimately how they would continue on the family's legacy. So it was extremely important to Blanche's parents, specifically her mother, for her to make sure that she made good choices when finding a man to marry, finding a suitor to marry. So she basically was very beautiful, and through her teens and early 20s, hadn't really settled down just yet. She was just basically enjoying life, enjoying getting to know people, and wasn't really ready to get settled down until about her mid 20s or so. And so back then, if you were past 25, 30 was definitely spinster territory. But if you were anything above about, 24, 25, mid 20s, you would be considered, like a spinster, basically, someone that has not yet gotten married yet. And so the chances of you getting married would just decline significantly the older you got past mid 20s and beyond. So Blanche Monnier was not really worried about this too much. She was more interested in finding love, finding her true love, as opposed to who her mother thought would be the best choice for her. It was her domineering mother who was really behind the driving force of her, telling her that, your time is running out, and if you don't do something quick, you're never going to get married. But Blanche, being the free spirit, the lover of reading, and just romance in general, was not worried about that at all. She was more interested in finding her true love, and at the age of 25, she believed that she had done just that. So, at the age of 25, Blanche Monnier is approaching mid to later 20s, and she has the overbearing pressure of her mother telling her to find a husband, but still being the fun loving, true romantic to her heart, decides that she falls in love with Victor Calmel. And Victor was basically a penniless lawyer. He didn't come from money like the Monniers did. However, they were very much in love with each other. Victor was also much older than Blanche by about 13 years. So the mother was definitely not on board with this at all. However, Blanche and Victor were essentially in love. And Blanche wanted to do anything to be with him. It stated that she would sneak out of the house to meet up with him, and that was definitely not kosher just because you were supposed to be out in public with your suitors. Your families were supposed to talk about basically what the futures of the two of you would be and how compatible you would be. But again, with Blanche having the fun, young, loving spirit that she had, she really didn't feel that she needed to answer to anyone but herself. She was definitely following her heart and doing what she wanted to do. Now, there is some speculation that she did wind up pregnant, which would definitely be scandalous back in the late 1800s in this aristocratic family in France. However, again, that is speculation, but it could possibly be a motive for as to why the mother took it this far, in conjunction with Blanche wanting to just basically marry someone that she did not approve of as well. So Blanche's mother, Louise, had a very domineering spirit, and she ultimately thought that she had the right and the ability to control her daughter. And she ultimately was arguing with her daughter and basically stated, "You need to leave this man. You're not going to marry him." And Blanche was like, "No, I don't want to do that. I want to ultimately marry him. I'm in love with him. I want to leave. I don't want to listen to what you're saying." Ultimately, Louise is able to convince her son, Blanche's brother, Marcel, that they needed to do something about it, intervene, if you will, for Blanche's quote unquote own good, and basically lock her up, kidnap her in the attic in this room until she agrees that she will not marry Victor and she will find another suitable husband. Now, Marcel basically was very loyal to his mother. He loved her, and he ultimately thought that he was fighting the good fight and that this was all for a good cause to protect Blanche against herself, if you will. There's not a lot of information as to what's going on with the father Emile at the time. I did see in my research that he had died when Blanche was about 30 years old, so it's not clear as to where the father kind of played in this whole thing. It just seems like it was a team with the mother and the son in basically locking Blanche up for several years and mistreating her during all of those years. So one day when Blanche is returning home, Louise and Marcel grab Blanche. They throw her in the room, they lock the door, and they say, "You're not coming out until you agree never to see Victor again." She declines, and they decide to shut the door, and they never let her out for 25 years. And of course, people are wondering, where is Blanche Monnier? Where's this beautiful young socialite? Her mother lies and says that she went away. She's not really sure where she is. She just went away and never returned. She's not sure if she ran off with someone, the whole nine. And for several years, Louise and Marcel keep up this charade. All the while, Blanche is laying up in the room, wasting away. There are reports that passerbyers would hear screams as they would walk by as to, "Why am I here? Why won't they let me leave this prison?" And after a while, she had to quote unquote come clean and state, "Well, my daughter did come back home. She's very mentally ill and she's just very delusional. So I apologize if she's making any disruptances or disturbances in the neighborhood, but she's just out of her mind. Don't mind her if you hear her screaming." So again, they kept up this charade for several years, despite of the fact of people that were walking by were hearing her in agony, screaming in pain as well. Now, unfortunately for Blanche, the Monniers had a very respectable, noble name, so no one would suspect that anything really crazy was going on. So it allowed them to keep up this charade for several years, 25 years. She was up there wasting away. And I'm going to talk to you now about the conditions that they had this poor woman living in. Their own flesh and blood, mind you. Her own daughter, his own sister, they did this to. So, as you can see in this utterly disturbing and shocking photo, Blanche Monnier had wilted to almost nothing. She was weighing about 55 pounds. She was in a padlocked room that had no sunlight coming in, and they did not provide her a toilet, a bathroom, nothing to go to the bathroom in. When they would give her food, they would just send her scraps of food under the door, and they'd give her water every now and again, basically just dribs and drabs, to the point that the poor woman was wasting away. As you can see, the flesh is barely covering her bones. She has absolutely no fat on her at all. It's amazing that she even lived through this, and a miracle. It's a very sad one, but it's shocking that she was even able to live in these absolutely horrible conditions. The conditions were so bad that she was actually lying on a straw mattress that was moldy on the floor, and it was basically covered in urine, feces, rotten pieces of food, which would include old vegetables, old crust of bread, and there were also rats that were all around her. There were all types of bugs, and she was just laying in this filth, this excrement. And sources say that when they saw her, there was actually like a crust of this mixture of all of this filth that I'm describing that just kind of formed around her and had been forming for all of the 25 years. So I highly doubt that they were even going in there and cleaning her or removing these things. They just let it sit there for several years. Sources say that she had lice, and there were several insects and rats just running all around, animal droppings, a complete and utter disastrous health hazard this poor woman had to live in for several years. They did not provide her any type of entertainment, books to read, nothing. She just basically was laying here in her own waste, in her own filth, and was just basically wasting away. It's just really sad and disturbing that this beautiful young socialite went from being so vibrant, full of life, and in love to having to waste away and become this, all because her family did not approve of who she loved. So it was very, very sad, but there is a somewhat decent ending to this story, which we're going to discuss now. So the Monniers, being the rich family that they were, had a housekeeper, and when that housekeeper passed away, they went ahead and they hired two new people, two younger women who basically kind of knew what was going on with the situation, and they alerted the authorities, and they actually wrote a letter. So the letter here is on the screen. It was, of course, written in French, but I'm going to go ahead and read you the translation that these two individuals sent in. It says, Monsieur Attorney General, I have the honor to inform you of an exceptionally serious occurrence. I speak of a spinster who is locked up in Madame Monnier's house, half starved and living on a putrid litter for the past 25 years, in a word, of her own filth. So they sent this letter in, and it was investigated, and the Monnier family was very, very respectable. They had a wonderful name. The mother, Madame Monnier, Louise, was actually presented with an award for the Committee of Good Works, and her son, Marcel Monnier, was actually a law student as well. So they're just basically looking like these wonderful, upstanding citizens. So it was very difficult for them to believe this. However, investigators, thank goodness, did take a trip to the home, and when they got inside, that's when they saw just how disgusting the conditions were for this poor woman and how malnourished Blanche Monnier was, and essentially almost at death's door. So this was actually her saving grace, the two girls that worked there, because it actually got the word out that these two monsters, her own family members, had actually done this to her, and she was rescued. So ultimately, Blanche had no human contact except for the servants. They would actually be the ones that would leave her the table scraps, and it said that her only companions were the rats that would gather and feast on the table scraps. So they would actually kind of eat together, and those were sadly her only friends. Now, because Blanche had been locked up in this dark dark room for several years. Her eyes could not tolerate the light, so they had to shut the door and be very mindful and considerate that the light would hurt her eyes. Now, sources say the room was just so disgusting and stink, and the air was so murky that they couldn't stay in there very long, and they had to ultimately remove her and get out of the house. All the while, her mother and her brother are in another room, just basically being calm, unfazed by all of what's going on. It's stated that Louise and Marcel knew that Victor had actually died several years earlier when Blanche was in her 30s, but they never told her. Mind you, Louise is about in her 70s and Marcel is in his 50s, and when they discovered Blanche, she was about 49, 50 years old. So a lot of time had passed. The three of them and the servants were in the house, and they were living like this for years. Now, one has to wonder if the sole purpose of locking Blanche Monnier up was because they did not want her to be with Victor. Why would they keep her locked up after his death? And when asked, Marcel actually says, well, we thought that she was mentally ill because why would she want to be locked up here rather than just marry someone else? So that was their quote unquote excuse for allowing her to be locked up several years after Victor had even died. So after rescuing Blanche, authorities took her to the Hotel du Hospital in Paris for observation. She was very quiet and she even expressed contentment when taking a bath, saying how lovely it is in French. And she was basically liberated and happy. She could only say a few words and couldn't really frame a complete sentence, but she was just showing that she was very gracious to them and she was very thankful for the nurses cleaning her up and ultimately saving her life. So Blanche's mother, Louise, actually was arrested. She became ill shortly after all of this, and she died about 15 days later after seeing an angry mob in front of her house. So that's what happened with her mother. As far as Marcel, he was actually appearing in court and was initially convicted, but then was later acquitted on appeal. He deemed that he was mentally incapacitated, and although the judges did criticize his choices, they found that a duty to rescue did not exist in the penal code at that time with sufficient rule to convict him. So ultimately, he got away on quote unquote mental illness. As for Blanche, she can be seen here in this photo. She was actually in a psychiatric hospital here, and she suffered from various disorders, including anorexia, schizophrenia, exhibitionism, and also chorophilia, which is kind of like basically being aroused from feces. The poor woman went crazy after all those years of being cooped up in that house and ultimately died of a broken heart, not just because she wasn't able to be with her true love Victor, but just heartbroken that her own family members would do something like this to her. So it's a very, very sad story of Blanche Monnier. I did want to share it with you guys today. She actually died in October 13th of 1913, and she was about 64 years old in the Third French Republic. So this is her story, and this is the video, guys. Tell me what you think about it in the comments. Is this your first time hearing about the story? Have you heard about it before? Or maybe you learned something new today about it? What are your general thoughts about what happened to her? I just think it's heartbreaking that her own family would do this to her, and ultimately she died of a broken heart because she couldn't A, be with the love of her life, but mainly B, her own mother and brother did this to her. She had no human contact with the world. The only friends that she had were the rats that cohabitated with her. And in the end, the servants that were serving her actually were the only ones that cared enough to alert the authorities. So that was the only glimmer of hope for Blanche in this story. I think it's really sad that she was a beautiful young woman who had her entire life ahead of her. And even though she wasn't murdered per se, her mother and brother still stole her life from her because it was wasted in a room, away and isolated essentially from everyone. I find it truly ironic that her mother thinks that she's saving her from quote unquote wasting her life away and was afraid that she was going to become a spinster. And in the end, that's exactly what she did become just because her mother decided to keep her locked up in this room and not marry her true love. So it's incredibly ironic. So that's the video, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. If you like this video, I'd love to have you back on the channel again. So please like, comment, and subscribe. Those of you who have been subscribing and liking and commenting, I see you. I appreciate you. And I'd love to have you guys back. I've got a lot of other great videos planned, so I'd love to see you guys back on the channel. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye for now, and I'll see you soon.